Buenas tardes a todos. Me llamo Jaime Castellano y soy el director de la Escuela Vida. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jaime Castellano, and I am the executive director of Vida Charter School. Muchísimas gracias por la invitación para ser su orador principal por la noche. Thank you for allowing me to be your keynote speaker for this event this evening. When I spoke to Amelia and she wanted me to speak, it wasn't until just the other day when we decided on what that should be about. And so we agreed that we would talk about embracing diversity and what that meant, and through telling a story, una cuenta de mi vida personal, right? So I thought, yeah, I can do that. That's quite easy. In our lives, there are events that help shape who we are and who we become. And for me, I can tell you that it's a journey, this idea of embracing diversity. It's both the good and the bad. A principio, I can tell you that my earliest recollection as a 5-year-old kindergartner, living on the south side of Chicago, in the middle of the steel mill belt, where the community was transitioning from a white, blue-collar community to a community that was being dominated by the Mexicans and the Mexican Americans. It was becoming a Mexican barrio. And I recall in our neighborhood during that transition that quite often the white neighbors that we had, the few that were left, would call us dirty Mexicans, go back to where you come from. And that has stuck in my head even to this day. And that happened when I was 5 years old. And I thought to myself, how could people be like that? Why do we treat each other in this way? What has happened in their lives to speak out against a child who's only 5 years old? And of course my brother and my other siblings. And so there was a white flight from the south side of Chicago in the steel mill belt to the south suburbs of Chicago. So after a year or so, fue un barrio de puro mexicano-americano. La mayoría de gente. And so we went to school. Everybody was brown skinned. Had last names like Castellano, Martinez, Gonzalez, Garcia, Fernandez. Okay, and that's what I was used to. And that's how we were educated. There was no ESL. There was no bilingual education. We went to school and it was sink or swim. You learn English or you don't. And so in Chicago, las escuelas públicas empiezan kinder y termina 8 grado. They start in kinder and they end in 8th grade. And so then you go to high school in Chicago. And for us, living in the Mexican barrio, having never gone to school with anybody else but other Mexicans and Mexican Americans, you're suddenly thrown into an environment where half of the student population in high school are African American. And the high school years were tumultuous, I'm sure for all of us, or most of us. And I recall, as a high school student, being victimized, being exposed to other forms of racism, prejudice, and discrimination coming from African Americans. And don't misunderstand, the Hispanics, the Mexicans, and the Mexican Americans were just as mean to the African Americans. And so there was a conflict. Durante los años, en mi experiencia como estudiante en las escuelas secundarias en Chicago, fue un conflicto, una contra entre los africanos americanos y los hispanos latinos, de verdad. But I survived that story, thank goodness. I think I survived because I was the nerd. I was the one that was always reading, I was always doing my homework. I guess you would say in my family, the white sheep of the family. Because there were 5 of us, And in reflection, I can jokingly say that we were like this close from being Jerry Springer material. Okay, that's how dysfunctional the community was, and in my house where I grew up. And so I graduated from high school and I went to the university. And you have to understand, in the barrios, whether they're the barrios of Chicago, Nueva York, Miami, Cleveland, wherever, York, the Hispanics or the Latinos that go onto the university, very, very small. Okay, so for every one of us that goes to the university, there's 100 of us that do not. And so in my family, being the fourth of five and the first to graduate from high school and then go on to the university, it was a big celebration. And so I remember that day back in, I won't tell you the year because I'm kind of dating myself, right? But a long time ago, okay, actually it was about it was in the mid-70s. Yeah, I was a disco child, right? It was a big thing because I was the first in my first generation to go to the university. And so as you would imagine, my brother, my sisters, their spouses at the time, my grandparents, nieces, nephews, uncles, cousins, it was a caravan from the barrios of the south side of Chicago to DeKalb, Illinois, which is corn country, USA, the heartland of America. Okay. So we take that 3-hour drive to DeKalb from the Mexican barrios. We get there and we're all in culture shock. We have never seen so many white people in our lives. Okay, then that first day, that first few days of attending a university of 25,000 kids. And so I reported to my dormitory, 50 young men in a dorm floor at a big university in the Midwest. 49 white guys and me. Okay, so even then, I was the victim of racism, discrimination, and prejudice, but I was determined to be successful. I wanted to persevere. I wanted to show my mom that I could do this. Of course, I didn't tell her that I was deathly afraid. But I guess one of the major points that I have to make is that I sought out other people who were like me. Other Latinos, other Hispanics at the university. And at the university of 25,000 at that time, there were maybe 400 Hispanic Latino students on campus. And so many of us sought each other out because we had similar stories, similar backgrounds. And as a result, I joined the Organization of Latin American Students at the university. And so that infrastructure, that support system, helped me to survive and be successful at the university. I stayed on to get a master's degree at that same university. Quite frankly,